Welcome to episode 16 of the PIXL Drone Show podcast. Jess and I connected 4 years ago under extraordinary circumstances, to say the least, and we have been friends since. I have watched her journey, and I am just amazed at how much she and her company, ReignMaker, have accomplished in these past few years. It really is inspiring. So recently, they've launched the Nixie, and this is the very first drone-enabled water sampling and data collection system. If you keep up with drone news, you've seen it everywhere, and DJI even featured it. Welcome to the show, Jess and John Gustafson, their Director of Operations, who I've also had the pleasure of speaking with in the past. Glad to have you on here. And so for our listeners not familiar yet, can you tell us what the Nixie is and what you can do with it?
Hey, Kara. Sure. So I'm Jess Chosid, CEO of ReignMaker, and what Nixie can do is very simply connects to a heavy lift drone, and right now we've designed it for the M600 or M300, and can very efficiently and quickly collect water samples. Our advanced version actually has water sensors, different bundle packages we're able to customize depending on the client and the industry. So mining would want a different sensor package than, let's say, oil and gas, than maybe the water utilities. And basically, it just has to dip 1 to 2 seconds, and it will automatically collect and store the data in the Nixie water sampling app. Again, soon to be released. And then we're going to have all the centralized water data. And we're going to work with various different entities, NGOs, and governments in order to create very advanced analytics for this water. So it will help monitor and clean water, essentially.
That is impressive. And I hate using the word disruptive. It reminds me too much of my tech days anyways, and it's overused. But the Nixie is going to do away with dependence on marine vessels. What inspired you to create this system?
So this was because ReignMaker was working under some contracts with the New York City Department of Environmental Protection using sensors and drones. And when we were on a project, I was standing next to a deputy commissioner of the DEP, and I overheard him speaking about just what a nightmare, headache, how complex it was for New York City to handle all the water sampling needs. In order to stay, because everyone has to comply with the Clean Water Act. So not only the water utilities, but also oil and gas and mining and every industry that involves water. So as I was like eavesdropping, and I turned to him and I said, listen, if I figured out a way how to collect water samples via drone, would you be interested? And he was like, yes. I was like, okay. And that started it. That started the investigation and the early development and the testing, and it took good 2 years.
You said earlier you test and you clean the water as well. Is that the plan? Is to clean the water as well?
No, it doesn't clean. It just collects the water samples, because you need to do that for certain EPA regulations. But also with the sensor system, you're able to automatically collect up to 22 different parameters of water data. And so since we're able to collect this data essentially real time, that if something exceeds the allowable water parameter limit, it will automatically send an alert out to the team, to everyone who's on that particular team using the sensor. And then they could immediately mitigate and try to figure out what's going on. If there is natural contamination, man-made contamination, a spill, who knows?
Yeah, that makes sense. And so the Nixie itself can be mounted on any platform. Is there a payload limit maybe that you're looking for? Or what are the platforms that you're working with primarily?
So primarily we're working with the DJI M600 and M300. But we are able to make this to design it to work with any heavy lift system as long as it can handle the payload and the water currents. And the water currents are really important. So the M600 is a bit of a more powerful in terms of the payload capacity than the M300. So with the M300, we make Nixie with a smaller EPA approved water sampling bottle than with the M600. Um, and again, it's right now the M600 is we send everything out for independent engineering analysis because we have to, of course, protect the drone as well. We don't want to, affect the integrity of the drone. Um, so it can handle up to 5 knots of water current, which is pretty strong, by the way.
Hmm.
The M600, this is. Um, and so we're still doing the independent analysis for the M300. We have to just get through a final stage with that, but it'll be ready to go very soon.
So your customers, you said governmental primarily. What is there
We
any
don't
other types of customers that you have?
actually, we don't think that government will probably not be our first customers just because they're very conservative, very slow to move. The RFP process is very long. We
Yeah.
believe the first customers will be our community. Everyone that we know in the drone community, the drone service operators, because we realized that we wanted to make a device that was going to generate revenue, not only for us, but for the drone community. And there is a lot of water out there to be sampled. And this is a way that we can because the only way a device is going to be bought is if it's affordable for the community and if it's going to be a revenue generating device for them. Otherwise, what's the point of buying it? And I know this as a service operator. So that will be our first target market, but that's a very small market relative to the other ones. The other markets that we will aggressively be going after is the oil and gas and the mining industry, as well as private water utilities. But again, I think oil and gas and mining will be very important for us.
We had talked a while back, and you had mentioned that DJI is doing away with the M600, or I don't want to say discontinuing it, but they're not really developing it, and there doesn't seem to be anything on the horizon. What kind of challenges could that present to you, your company, and other similar service providers?
Oh, wow. That's okay. There's so many ways, and John's going to chime in at a certain point
Yeah.
too, but about this. But okay, so this is the thing. For us, we can work with it. I mean, it's unfortunate because it's such a great, solid, reliable system. And I have expressed my point of view to DJI as many others have. Um, hopefully they will reverse their decision or come out with an I don't know, M700 or something. But but
However they name it.
that's why we've made it, for the M300 as well. And we're happy to make it for any other system as long as we can make sure the system can handle, the payload and go through the proper testing. Okay, but on the bigger picture with the M600s, it's LIDAR, 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 LIDAR. And John, take it away.
Yes.
Well, I mean, you're right in saying the M600 is really appealing because it has the low entry for skill to operate it, using the DJI Go app, and a lot of the flight controllers the parameters are such that it's very easy for non-seasoned operators to use. If you can fly a P4 Pro or a Mavic, you can step into an M600 very easily. So for that aspect, it's been very good for the market and adopting larger sensors like just said, like LIDAR, which, the data is a whole different aspect as far as, collecting water samples. But the whole point is that the market is saturated with these heavy lift aircraft. Very good aircraft. Battery time varies on some of these payloads, but that was the main reason why it was designed for the M600, was because of its high performance capabilities and the saturation of the market. Now that it's being phased out, we think DJI is going to be coming in with another heavy lift, but I think that there's a lot of new heavy lifts in the market that are Pixhawk made, running off the blue cube or the black cube. Um, Things like Watts Innovations, Free Fly Systems, things like this that are custom made, more boutique, but are starting to get more of a market share for the heavier lift. And as far as the Nixie goes, it's simply a redesigning based off of the fuselage and the design of the aircraft, depending on if the landing gear articulates or if it's fixed. These are the types of things that would vary on the design, but we see, just based off of market numbers, the M600 still being appealing and its useful life continuing into another few years, which will give us time to adopt into the next more popular heavy lift aircraft.
So and I just want to jump in very quickly. The thing with LIDAR is that, and the M600 it's a relatively inexpensive comparatively to its peers. Not only does it, that's the system that the majority of drone operators have bought in that weight class, but the price point is much lower. And we all want to support, US made systems. Of course we do. But the reality is, if there's just a small fraction of users, that's a problem. Now, the thing about LIDAR is some of the heavier payloads for the more sophisticated systems, let's say like Regal-based sensors. So whether you're talking about, Yellow Scan or LIDAR USA or Phoenix or whatever, we're talking about 6 pounds. And so think about how many systems can handle that, but also you're carrying systems that start at like $150,000 start, right? So you want a system that's incredibly reliable. And so quite frankly, since the M600's been on the market the longest, and it has a really good safety record and reliability record, and the price point, all those things, that's the problem. If it phases out, that's the problem. What is everyone going to be moving their LIDAR systems to?
So I had a question for John. John, what are your duties with the company? I know you're director of operations. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do on a day-to-day basis, what it consists of, and then how you get involved with the company?
So there's a lot of hats to wear in this particular company. I started in February of this year, so I've known Jess for a few years. I met her back when I was working for a survey company doing LIDAR with a small helicopter aircraft, which is the Altus Intelligence. They're out of business now, but the performance was great. And I met Jess through networking, and I think we were talking about a thermal job at the time. And we stayed in touch ever since. I came out of a former company of General Electric, which was called Arrows. We dissolved. That company was dissolved in February, and that's when I came on board to work with Jess. So, as director of operations, a lot of it is logistical planning, talking about systems, and really helping customers. Really focusing on the technical requirements that the customer has, and then saying this is the sensor, or these are the sensors that are needed, and then these are the aircraft that can fly with these sensors. So the aircraft really comes last, and that's being a big stressful, not stressful, but we really stress that point with our customers to build their technical requirements and then pick the aircraft last and build the aircraft around the sensor, because we're going to need performance-based things. Like you can't fly LIDAR on a VTOL, on most VTOLs, because you're going too fast. You'll have to do multiple scan lines. So there's all these little variables. And that's where a lot of my job comes in as far as the planning goes. And then there's flight execution as well, where we have to physically fly some sites, usually more sensitive sites like at airports or, for Port Authority and things like that. Otherwise, we have other employees and people that can fly some of the more volume sites. And so there's a little bit of management in that as well. So it can be in the office for 3 weeks and then in the field for a week working nights, so it varies, but I would say it's mostly logistical planning, technical consulting, and then probably 15% actually flying.
Sounds interesting. Sounds like something different every day, which is always good.
There is, yeah. I mean, it could be 3D printing a part, or playing around with CAD and trying to design new ideas for different parts we're coming up with, looking at other aircraft, like what is the next big heavy lift aircraft, and let's come up with a prototype so we can maybe fit the Nixie on this if this is what people are going to be using. Just kind of anticipating where the market's going, and it's nice to see a lot of VTOLs coming on the market now. And I think for this particular payload that we have, it's actually more appropriate for a multi-rotor until we get into some of the heavier class weights. But yeah, it's a good time to be in the industry, and the remote sensing itself too is now really taking off with these affordable LIDAR. So that's exciting to see it become more entry level as opposed to having to put that $250,000 investment into just getting the sensor and then spending a year trying to figure out how to process the data and classify and tie it to ground control. Then a lot of survey companies go through that. So these are all little things that we kind of interact with and cross paths with depending on our customers and some of the industrial applications.
Yeah, I work for a university, and I can relate to this. We acquired a LiDAR unit for the Matrice 600, and that's what we've been doing, spending our time trying to figure out how to make the whole unit work. So yeah, I feel the pain.
Yeah, well, I'd be happy to let you learn any lessons we've learned, so you don't have to learn the hard way. And we could talk about that later if you'd like. But yeah, they're amazing sensors, but they definitely take you have to have your routine worked out and have your checklist, so you repeat everything and have every piece of equipment. Those are the little things that take time to figure out until you make that mistake and say, oh, we didn't bring the batteries for the Trimble GPS so we can shoot our ground control points, things like that, and then to the processing side of it, depending on what software and sensor you're using.
Yep, absolutely.
So moving back to Nixie, I imagine there were probably quite a few legal challenges you had to face just to get this product approved for use. Can you elaborate on this process publicly at all?
Well, I will say that the most challenging aspect of it was the intellectual property process, the patenting. So if you do a search under my last name, the patent will actually come up. Now it's published, but it took a really long time and it took a lot of money. And it's not easy, but we're very. I'm glad we went through the process, but it's really hard. And I have said this. I said this 5 years ago. I've said this 4 years ago, and I'll say this now: that the biggest money makers in this industry are the lawyers. Yeah.
No question there. So Kara had mentioned the underwater drones, and maybe I'm sure this is something you've looked at before, and I see that there are some underwater drones on your website. When would you recommend a customer uses an underwater drone versus using an aerial platform? It makes sense. You're collecting water, right? Water samples. Why not use an underwater drone instead of a UAS?
There's a few reasons why. One is that Nixie was developed that it could hold EPA-approved water sampling bottles, because you need a sterilized, approved bottle for the water samples. You can't collect the water samples from like a tube that you're reusing, because the contamination from one site will affect the sampling results of another site. So you have to use brand new sterile water sampling bottles for every single sample if you need a physical sample. So that's kind of the biggest reason. And there are some really interesting surface vehicles that are like maybe 3 or 4 feet long, and like one of our clients uses it on the reservoir, and it kind of moves around slowly, and it uses sensors. But there's limitations with it because it can't float to everywhere. It's pretty slow. And sometimes you need to take a physical sample and not just a sensor, not just collect the data. So that's the limitation of it, I would say. Yeah. So we designed Nixie just just to explain this, why it's 1 meter long, is because ideally you want to collect the water samples from beneath the very top surface water, because there's a lot of floatables, a lot of things that float to the top of the water, and it's not a true good example of the actual water body. So ideally you want to collect it from 2 feet under the water surface. So that's why Nixie is designed the way it is.
Oh, that makes sense.
Do you also provide data analysis services?
But once we collect enough data, and so that's one of the big future plans, is the platform will have really, I think, this will be the most valuable aspect of Nixie, to be honest, because it'll be the ultimate water data collector, and all the data that's collected in the world goes into a centralized system. And not only that, but we plan to integrate with larger water data collection systems that are currently being used in water utilities. And we are planning to work with various different partners, from the NGO world to the government world, and maybe a private AI firm, to really start working on the predictive analysis of some of this data. But this is not going to be immediate. We're not really even going to focus too much on it until, we get through the first phase.
That makes sense. So, is there any kind of training that is required in order to operate the device in itself, or is it pretty self-explanatory?
Well, we will offer some, operational training in terms of, ideal ways to collect the sample, in terms of like using the drone, and just giving some heads up about, Nixie and all of that. But honestly, anyone who is already using the M600 need very little training, because the system just dips into the water. What we're talking about developing now, in order to help the operators, again, most operators who are already using the M600 are very experienced in controlling it. But if you're not comfortable using the Nixie on an M600, you probably shouldn't be flying an M600, to be honest. Like, you should have a certain amount of control. But we are talking about maybe having some kind of sensor system that will help the operator, maybe a collision avoidance with the water, so the Nixie can't go too far down. And that's something we really like to develop.
It could be something as simple as an FPV camera, that if you're way out over, let's say, a lake or a large body of water, or let's say it's a frozen lake and you're doing samples in the open pools that are tough to access by boat, or traditionally, which was brought up in one of the conversations, you could tilt the FPV camera down, or have a fixed FPV camera down, be it a little Foxier camera or a DJI digital camera, and then you can physically see the sample bottle go in and use that as well. We've also even talked about doing that and taking a picture of the surface water, just to see if there are floaties or whatever on it, for further analysis. And also, the metadata is also useful in that as well, as far as using the EXIF data for the Latin launch.
So now that you've created Nixie and it's a success, do you have any future plans for other systems as you move into other sectors of the drone industry? You had talked about other applications earlier on in the podcast.
Yeah. So what we plan to do is, we're going to be looking for feedback from the drone community. And it's going to be very important. We already have partners in various different states with Nixie, but we are looking to see what they would like us to develop. Because there's particular industries that we are not familiar with. They might have certain needs, and we can kind of modify Nixie for certain industries, and particular. The nice thing about Nixie is that we developed like this universal attachment, so that the Nixie can be a lot of things. So we developed it in a modular way, so we can pop off the bottom, let's say, water holder, and we could pop on a different type of attachment. And of course, every time we make an attachment, we have to design it in such a way that it's safe. So it has to go through a certain amount of engineering, safety analysis and all that. But, we really want to be a firm that is catering to our community, because not enough not enough drone firms have done that in the past.
Yeah, and that's a great way or good approach to future development of products. I had posted this on Drone Community, just asking who's going to be at Commercial UAV Expo, and you said you'll be there. I apologize for not looking at the page in advance, but will you be an exhibitor? People attending this conference, will they be able to check out the Nixie or get more information?
Well, certainly, I'm definitely going to be there, and I'll have some Nixies with me. I'm not sure if we're going to exhibit yet. We have a bunch of different exhibitions. It sounds like a no-brainer, but we have a few more that are specifically in the water or oil and gas industry around that time. And we're a startup, and we gotta pick and choose. But I would like to. Let's say that. If we can do it, we will do it. Exhibit, I mean.
I think this is a really interesting technology. We don't see many people out there doing what you guys are doing, which I think is absolutely necessary. Water is a big deal. I mean, in Arizona, we have a major shortage of water at the moment because everything is pretty dried up around here. So it's good to have the ability to use drones in a very smart way to do what you guys are doing. So I think this is really an interesting technology, and appreciate you guys sharing all the information.
Do you have any kind of projected growth or adoption rate you'd like to see over the next few years, just to justify all the effort that went into this initiative?
Well, yeah, I mean, but we already know that it's a completely new way of doing water sampling, and water sampling has not changed in decades in the United States and in Europe. However, what's really interesting is that we believe our largest market will actually be in Asia, because Asia is, they kind of went from the 19th century directly into the 21st century, and they don't have these long established, regulations and government agencies to say how water sampling or anything should be done. So they're very open to using new technology. So we're really excited about the Asian market. And I will say that in terms of, the other uses, just to kind of broadly go over Nixie, is also for emergency management. We think there's going to be a big problem. We think there is a big problem that's not being reported on in some places, including California, with PFAS, because the firefighting foam has a particular carcinogen, and the water sampling, water sensors will pick up that material. Because the firefighting foam will eventually, or probably already is in some areas, already in the water supply. So California is going to need a lot of water sampling.
Yeah, I can imagine. I love California. I grew up there, but it does have its share of issues. There's no doubt about that. And it's exciting to hear that Nixie is something that can help us, solve one in particular, like you had just mentioned. So, yeah.
So I do have a question about the foam. Is that foam coming from standard firefighting, or is that from the forest fires primarily that you think the foam is getting dispersed?
Standard. It's standard. It's like a big problem in the industry. It's a big, big problem. So, I think that in the future, there's going to be greater regulation with this particular type of material. But right now, there isn't enough. But everyone's aware. Everyone in the water industry is very aware of this problem, just like everyone in the water industry are aware of the pharmaceuticals that are in the water, that have been linked to certain things in youth.
So I'm going to bring up the women in drone thing. Just being a woman in this industry, do you find any extra particular challenges or opportunities? Do you care to elaborate on that?
So
You
first
don't
of all,
have to.
Women in Drone is a really great organization, and there's some incredibly badass people who happen to be women who I really look up to. So in terms of, ReignMaker is a New York City and New York State women business enterprise. And I suppose, that gives us a certain amount of door opening initially to actually meet larger entities. But it's like we're not competing with other drone agencies for this work. We're competing with every other like woman and minority owned business out there. So it's not like anything is handed to us. Um, in terms of the larger issue of women in the drone industry, I mean, there needs to be more women in it. What can I say? If our society is 50%, male to female ratio, and there's under 6% women in this industry, and probably about 1% of developers and makers, I mean, we're losing a lot of talent not having the women in this industry. And that's really apparent when you look at the makeup of the women in drones, because so many of them are so incredibly impressive, either with the former military, or their academic or their government experience. Yeah, so it's hopefully that improves.
Yeah, I could not agree more. So I'm glad that you're out there doing the work you're doing and setting the example, because I think when other people see it and they see themselves potentially in it, then they're going to be inspired to go after their own goals. So thank you.
Yeah, hope so.
So we always have a fun question for our guests towards the end of the show. And the question is, what is your favorite drone to fly?
John, you go.
That's a tough one. Probably between a mix of one of my 5-inch racers with a beta flight that's tuned just right. It took me a long time to get those PIDs right. And I would say the classic Phantom 4 Pro, just because it paid the bills early on in the years, the Phantom 3 and the Phantom 4. So it helped get this journey started as far as making money with it.
So I will say I'm going to actually shift the question a little bit. I am very excited to see what Autel does. I'm very excited, now that John McBride is there and Randall at the helm, and they're truly, again, I feel a grassroots. It's coming from the industry ground up. They're really trying to get feedback from the community, and I'm really rooting for them. I just, I think they're listening to us, and I'm pretty excited about them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
me too.
that's a great point, Jess.
Yeah, and speaking of
Autel is a
listening
great.
to
The X-Star Premium was a great aircraft. I had that before I had the DJIs, and that camera was amazing. And then I bought the Autel Evo 2, which has been amazing. I really like the aircraft, and I like it just because it's not DJI, because you don't have to unlock restrictions. It's like you can fly it wherever. You don't have to worry about signing into an app, which is really nice.
One last thing. I do want to give props to DJI for being a supporter of Nixie, because there were a lot of we contacted certain American firms and European and DJI. I mean, of course they have their reasons and we have ours, but they were incredibly supportive of Nixie. And we told them that Nixie was not only being developed for the DJI systems, that we were, agnostic with technology, but you know, they were like all in, and they were psyched that of course we were using their systems first, of course. But yeah, Adam and Brendan, they both get a lot of grief, and you know, they understand that the small companies such as ReignMaker, you know, are very much affected when DJI systems um, are cannot be used on certain projects because of political reasons. You know, I don't want to get too far into that, but anyway, they were really great to us.
It was so great having you on the show. Thank you for taking time out. I know you guys are really busy, but I'm just really excited to see where you go with this product and just in general. And thank you again.
Yeah, thank you
Thank you.
both of you
Great to be here.
guys. Thank you.